So the question is, how do you stake on Solana? Is it similar to Ethereum? Answer is pretty close. As in, it's not proof of work, which is what Bitcoin had and Ethereum had for a long time. It is, based on the amount of Solana that you're staking. But the mechanism is a little different. The mechanism is, there is a leader schedule that is created every epoch, if you understand what epochs are. And that leader schedule is sort of followed, and the number of times you'll be the leader depends on how much you have staked. And similar slashing happens if you do something bad. So you would consider it to be very close to Ethereum, but there are some requirements in terms of the compute that you need, the network that you need on Solana, which is slightly more than Ethereum. Already more questions. We will start in 2 more minutes. We'll start at 8:04. Study module results is coming out today. I have the list. I can show you if you want. I have like three best ones, and now I just have to choose. Will there be one winner? Will there be 3 winners? Things like these. So should be announced today. Clear your camera. That is a good point. 1 second. All right. Hopefully that's better. Bunch of Notion docs. I will look at them at the end of the class. Yeah, I think we'll have time for Notion docs towards the end. We might. I think we'll be able to end by 9:30. And I have another meeting at 10. So in the last half an hour, we can do Q&A. So let's just start a little early so that we have time for Notion docs towards the end. Pin myself, make myself smaller. Very quick recap of what we've done until now. Not even a recap. I just hope you all know this by now. Yesterday, I think 85% understood everything until replica sets and deployments. So a very quick refresher/recap. We've understood what is Kubernetes. We understood how you used to deploy before Kubernetes. Right now, we're learning how things changed after Kubernetes was introduced. We understood how to create a local Kubernetes cluster. This will not be needed today. You can use this today also. But today we might have to go to a cloud provider, specifically because we're doing something related to networking. So abhi tak if you were running a local cluster, great. But today onwards, it's a good idea for you to get a Kubernetes cluster on a cloud provider. We understood about the Kubernetes API, how there is an HTTP server that is exposed, that the developer talks to, even kubelets talk. That's fine. Then we understood what is a pod, which was the very first Kubernetes resource we learned about. What is a pod? It's the lowest level construct in Kubernetes. A pod can start multiple containers. If you really remember the diagram, it looked something like this. Okay, you have multiple nodes. Whenever you start a pod, inside the pod, you can start one or many containers. This specific pod is starting one container, but from time to time, you start multiple containers inside the same. We understood how to start a pod, how to stop a pod. We understood about the Kubernetes manifest. This is what the manifest file looks like. This is what you should do, which means you should always create manifest files and apply them. You should not run naked kubectl commands in your terminal. Then we did a checkpoint. This was the first class. Clusters, nodes, nodes is called the cluster. Node, each one of these nodes is called a node, or each one of these machines is one of these. Hello. I guess you guys can hear me. Containers are standard Docker containers, and finally pods is the new thing we learned in the first class. Then in the second class, which is yesterday, we understood about deployments and replica sets, another 2 resources. They're very close to what they do, but hopefully we understand the difference by now. Okay, replica sets are used to control pods. A replica set, if you give it, okay, you need to start 2 pods, it will start 2 pods for you. If one of them crashes, it will restart the pod. Deployment is something else. Deployment doesn't really start a pod. So this diagram is incorrect. Deployments starts replica sets start pod. So the general hierarchy is that whenever you create a deployment, the deployment will create one or many replica sets in the future. Replica set will create one or many pods. This is what we discussed until yesterday. We tried this locally, it was working locally. The problem was we did not understand how to expose the application, which is what we'll do today. आज हम क्या सीखेंगे? What are we going to learn today? How do you expose your application on the internet? Until now, the applications that we have been running, even though वो चल रही हैं, they are working. They are not exposed over the internet, which means no one can really visit that website. We can fix that by using something called services in Kubernetes. So what are we learning? We'll be learning two things at a high level today. We'll learn about services. We'll learn about this thing called namespaces in Kubernetes. If we are able to do both of these, we are good to go. Probably should take 1 hour and at max 30 minutes. Okay? The first thing for today is services in Kubernetes. Why do you need services in Kubernetes? Because the cluster that we have been starting until now, if you remember, this is how we have been starting our Kubernetes cluster. In my Mac machine, I run a command that looks like this: kind create cluster config.yaml. I ran this command on my local Mac machine, and that started a multi-node Kubernetes setup. Let's say 4 nodes, 1 master node and 3 worker nodes. Do we remember this? This we have done a few times. We did this in the last class. We did it in the class before as well. Today also we will do it. We started replica sets in here. By the end of it, what was created were a bunch of pods that are running on these worker nodes. What is a pod? It just runs one or many of your containers. The problem is you can't really access this on localhost something. You can't access this on google.com, facebook.com, api.harkirat.com. They are not exposed over the internet or even inside the intranet. Like one pod can't talk to another pod. Two containers in the same pod can talk to each other, but one pod cannot talk to another pod. That is a problem because we might want to be talked with the Node.js pod. There is a Node.js pod which needs to store some data in MongoDB. So this Node.js pod needs to talk to the MongoDB pod, needs to send, create queries, update queries, so on and so forth. This is if you host your MongoDB inside your Kubernetes cluster, which is a good thing and a bad thing. If you remember yesterday, app.100xapps.com crashed, if you've seen that tweet, because our database was hosted in our Kubernetes cluster. So generally it's a bad idea. It can lead to a bunch of complications. So it's a good idea to keep inside your Kubernetes cluster. Your Node.js backend, your Golang backend will have to talk to it. Will need a URL, mongo : / some mongo pod 27017, something like this. The Node.js process, the Node.js pod, the Node.js container inside the pod pods, it will be a little overwhelming. So if you don't know how to start pods, feel free to drop off as well. I'm not recapping that. I've recapped that 2 times. So today the assumption is you understand how to start pods. And we will learn about this thing called services, which is of three types. There are three types of services that exist in Kubernetes: node port, cluster IP, load balancer. There are three types of services. There is only one kind of pod. There are no different types of pods. There is only one type of deployment, one type of replica set. Services can be one of three types. Node port for external access, but in a slightly dumb way. Cluster IP for internal access in a good way, not a dumb way. And load balancer for external access in a slightly more productionized way. So there are three types of services. इन तीनों को हम एक एक करके समझेंगे. Before that, the prerequisite is कि आपके पास application locally चल रही हो, you have a Kubernetes cluster, you can start a few pods there. Let me take you through that process. Let me have the setup ready on my machine as well. But good idea for you to get a cloud Kubernetes cluster. Otherwise, life will be a little hard when we reach load balancer. When we reach load balancer, you will not be able to make it run on your local Kubernetes setup. You need a Kubernetes cluster somewhere on DigitalOcean, somewhere on AWS, so on and so forth. So I'm going to do two things. I'll go to digitalocean.com and start a Kubernetes cluster for myself. I will also start it locally. जब तक हम locally कर पाएंगे, I'll do it locally. When we are not able to do it locally, I'll move to DigitalOcean. And if you're on Vultr or GCP, steps remain very similar. GCP is very expensive. Vultr is slightly cheap. It will let you create a $20 cluster as well. AWS is a little tricky. It's not very easy to start a Kubernetes cluster in AWS. So pick and choose कि कहाँ start करना है. Even if you're not able to start it, that's fine. After the class, try to start a Kubernetes cluster in AWS, GCP, or DigitalOcean. This is my DigitalOcean setup. Let me create a new Kubernetes cluster here. So if I click on create Kubernetes, it asks me what version of Kubernetes do you want to run. Seems like this is some DigitalOcean Kubernetes, some fork of Kubernetes that these guys have maintained / run. Which region do I want to run it in? Probably somewhere in India if it exists. There you go, Bangalore. VPC, default VPC is fine. Ignore this. Cluster capacity. Do you want a dedicated CPU, shared CPU? Shared is fine. Basically the cheapest one for now. A 3-node setup where every node is 4 GB RAM, 2 virtual CPUs, 80 GB storage. And that is it. Very cheap Kubernetes cluster, only $72 a month. 3-node setup. It is starting right now. While this Kubernetes cluster of mine is starting on DigitalOcean, मैं locally भी start कर देता हूँ. How do you start a Kubernetes cluster locally? Do you remember? Kind is the CLI that we were using. Kubernetes inside Docker. Let me delete the cluster that I have right now. So kind delete cluster -n local. This is the cluster that we've been playing with on our machines until now. Now let me create a new Kubernetes cluster called local. I haven't given it a name, but I think something like this, -n local. Kind create cluster. This is the config file. So if I show you kind.yaml, what does it look like? It's a YAML file that says कि हमें cluster start करना है. Some API version ignore. I want to start 3 nodes. Oh, this is a slightly more complicated kind.yaml. Let me show you the simple one which we were using until now. If you go to slide number 4, you will find a very simple cluster.yaml. Mine is a little complicated. We'll come to why we need that. But abhi ke liye, I think I already have it in cluster.yaml. Yeah. So my cluster.yaml looks like this. Okay, I want to start 3 nodes, a master node and 2 worker nodes. I'm sure some of you already have this from the last 2 classes. So how do you start a Kubernetes cluster? Kind create cluster. This is the config file. And this is the name of my cluster. I'm calling it local. This will start a Kubernetes cluster locally. And now I can run a few commands to connect to this cluster as well. I also have one on DigitalOcean. It is currently in progress, hasn't yet started. Eventually we will have to move here. Abhi ke liye we don't have to move here. Abhi ke liye local setup is good enough. Let's wait for it to start. I would urge you to start it as well. I'm sure some of you already have it from the last two classes. For the people who don't, you will need the kind command line interface. Run this command after you have it. You need Docker in your machine as well, because this is Kubernetes inside Docker. So you need Docker, you need kind, run kind, create cluster, select the config file, and give it a name. If it is working for you, then you should see something like this. I have two of them running, it seems. So let me kind delete cluster local, and yeah, there you go. Restart. So I'm restarting the cluster. I had two of them running locally. I don't want two Kubernetes clusters running locally. I only want one. So I deleted both the clusters that I have, and then I restarted a new Kubernetes cluster locally. How do you know it's working for you? Just run docker ps. Let's do a poll. ये सबको समझ आता है ना? Do you want me to recap this, or we already know this from the last two classes? How to start a Kubernetes cluster locally? How to deploy a pod over there? Do we already know this? 83%. So it's like very simple stuff. We have not very simple stuff, but we have discussed both these things in the last two classes. So I would urge you to go there. For the 83% who do understand, let's proceed. For the 17%, just go to the last two classes. We have discussed this many times. Docker PS shows me 3 of my containers are running, which means Kubernetes cluster is running locally. If I run kubectl get pods, I see no pods currently running. Get deployment, I see no deployment currently present. Get service, I see one default Kubernetes service. Where we haven't learned about services, so ignore this one. Kube get pods shows me nothing. K get replica sets shows me nothing. K get deployment shows me nothing. Let's start a new pod here. How do you start a new pod? Create a manifest.yaml that looks like this. What does the manifest say? Okay, Kubernetes API version v1 mein pod was introduced. So a pod is what we want to start, which should have this name, these labels. You don't really need labels for a pod, but it's fine if you want to add them, add them. नहीं डालने ये lines हटा भी सकते हो. Just name nginx is good enough. And then the specification of the container, क्या हमें start करना है? We want to start only one container where the image that we're starting is nginx. So hub.docker.com/nginx. And this is the container ports that we have exposed. Notice we are saying ports are exposed, but still we can't really access this pod. Let's try it. Let's do a kubectl apply -f manifest.yaml. Another assumption here is you know what K is or what kubectl is, which is again something we have discussed many times. But kubectl is a command line interface that lets you interact with your Kubernetes cluster. So for the people who don't know this, you will need to install it eventually. Abhi ke liye I'm just proceeding. I on my machine have to write K because I have an alias for K which points to kubectl. So when I write K, it's the same as writing kubectl on my machine. It will not run on your machine. So I have applied the manifest. Hopefully the pod is running. K get pods. I have one pod running. K logs -f nginx. I see logs as well. Do you know what this nginx image does? Let's run it using Docker. I repeat, let's run it using Docker. Docker run -p 8080:80 nginx. Forget Kubernetes for now. Sure, we'll learn about Kubernetes. ये जो nginx image है, ये करती क्या है? We understand what the Mongo image does. We understand what the Postgres image does. What does this nginx image do? It exposes something on port 80, which on my Mac machine I'm exposing on port 8080. Docker run port mapping. My Mac machine's 8080 should point to nginx containers port 80. So if I go to localhost :8080, I see a default nginx page. Beautiful. मतलब कुछ तो करती है वो image. It exposes something on the internet. The container is exposing something on port 80 of the container, which I have exposed on port 8080 of my Mac machine. That is what Docker run -p 8080:80 nginx does, right? We already know this. This is not Kubernetes specific. This is a Docker concept. When I run this, a Docker container will start, which is going to run nginx. and the port 80 on this container has something exposed, and I have a port mapping from port 8080 of my Mac machine to the port 80 over here. That is why when I go to localhost colon 8080, I am able to get back the Nginx default page, which is this page right here. अब यही इमेज तो मैं अपने Kubernetes cluster में भी रन कर रहा हूँ. If you notice the logs over here and notice the logs in my Kubernetes pod, they look very similar. If you look at these lines and you look at these lines, of course there are some extra logs over here that were added because I visited that page in my browser. This is the first request that came, second request that came, so on and so forth. Let me stop the Docker process now. So we know for a fact Nginx is running. Our Kubernetes cluster is running the Nginx image. If I do a Docker, kget pods, I see the Nginx pod. Can I visit it? Where do I visit it? Should I go to, if you remember, our API server is hosted on 127.0.0.1 colon 54342, 56, whatever this IP is. If I go over here, I can do a API v1 deployment. If you remember, I can interact with my Kubernetes API server. Is my application available here? API v1 pods, connect, Nginx, aisa kuch? The answer is no. Where is this application exposed? And the answer is nowhere. Right now, we have a Kubernetes cluster where we have a 3-node setup, not a 4-node setup. We have a 3. When I say node, I don't mean Node.js. I mean 3 machine setup, 1 master machine, 2 worker machines. How can I confirm? When I run Docker PS, I can clearly see this is the local control plane, which is the local master node. These 2 are the worker nodes that I have. This is our setup. I have started Nginx here. Or, let me delete this. I have started Nginx here. Where do I visit it? How can I visit the Nginx pod from the internet? Here comes another Kubernetes resource we need to learn about called services. How to expose the applications? Yeah, one more thing you can do is, kubectl get pods -o wide, which means show me some more data. And you will see there is an IP. So you might be tempted कि यार इस IP पे तो कहीं नहीं है ये pod. Is this pod available on this IP? If you try to go here on whatever port 80, port 8080, you will find nothing is running there. So no, your application is still not exposed, even though you see an IP here. You can't really access it. How do you access it? By creating another Kubernetes resource called services. What all resources हमें अभी तक आती हैं? We understand pods, deployments, and replica sets. What is the next resource type that we're learning about? Services. In Kubernetes, a service is an abstraction that defines a logical set of pods and a policy by which to access them. Slightly complicated statement, but basically ये कह रहा है कि it defines a logical set of pods, 4 pods, 5 pods, 20 pods, 10 pods, and how to reach those pods. A service lets you expose a series of pods, let's say 10 pods, 5 pods, 2 pods, on the internet somewhere locally based on some rules. The Kubernetes service provides a way to expose the application running on a set of pods as network services. Services, network services, very close to each other. It's a very weird name. It should have been exposers or something like that, the name of this service. The name of this Kubernetes resource should have been something like exposer because it exposes your application. But unfortunately, it's named service. So what is a service in Kubernetes? It lets you expose your pods as network services. Here are some key points about them. मोटा मोटा ऊपर ऊपर से बताता हूँ. Pod selector is the important one. कि when you start a service, you need to create a selector कि कौन से pods पे ये service expose होनी चाहिए. Right now, I only have 1 Nginx pod running, but in the future I might have 2. I might have 3 Nginx pods. So when you create a service, a service shouldn't be here. Like it's not a pod that's running, but let's say I'm putting it here. you have to clearly specify कि यार ये वाला pod and this pod and this pod, these three pods are what, you know, this service needs to load balance between. So जब भी a request comes to this service, it should go here, it should go here, it should go here. If one of the pod dies, then you can remove it. If another pod is added, you can add it. So you have to define these rules using something called selectors. Do we remember selectors already? We have done them in replica sets. We've done them in deployments. Very similarly, we have to introduce selectors in services. Abhi we'll dive deeper into what that means. And there are three types of services. I've talked about this before. There is node pod, cluster IP, and load balancer. We'll come to them one by one. Abhi ke liye, we'll do node pod. Abhi ke liye, we'll do one of the simpler services, which is a node port service. What is a node port service? Expose the service on each node's IP as a static port, a node port. What is a node port service? कि यार आपके जितने भी ये nodes हैं ना, इनकी कुछ IP होगी. Let's say whatever. Locally, though, it will be something like this only, 127.0.0.1. But let's say it's, you know, DigitalOcean master node kirath.do.com. And then, you know, this is DigitalOcean worker node Kirath, or, you know, node 1. And then this is a DigitalOcean worker node 2. The node port service says, if you have exposed the Nginx application using node port, anyone can come to this URL, colon whatever, let's say you exposed it on 8080, or they can come to this URL, colon 8080, or they can come to this URL, colon, oopsie daisy, colon 8080. In तीनों URLs पे, whenever a request comes, it will be forwarded to one of these pods. It's not necessary कि उस pod को उस node पे चलना है. This pod could be running on this node. If a request comes here, it will still be forwarded here. If a request comes here, it can be forwarded here. It can also be forwarded here. So, when you create a node port service, which is the easiest way to expose your application, आपका एक pod चल रहा है, आप चाहते हो लोग इसको access कर पाएं. The easiest way to do that is to expose it via node port. Now, there are a bunch of downsides to this. Number one biggest downside is people know your node URLs. Your exact node URLs are exposed to the world. So they can DDoS, do a bunch of things, right? Which is why this isn't ideal. This isn't something you should use, but it's the simplest one. Your application will be deployed on the internet. So let's create our very first node port service and let's see, does it work? हमारी application expose हो रही है कि नहीं? अभी तो नहीं हो रही. अभी तो if you look at, we only have one Kubernetes service, or not service, one Kubernetes resource, which is a pod. I don't have any other resource. I don't have a deployment. I don't have a replica set. If you look at the current resource that I have, it looks like this. API version v1, kind pod, metadata, name Nginx, and it has some labels. Where were these labels used, if you remember? They were used in replica sets, so that the replica set could identify कि कौन से pod उसके हैं. That is where these labels were used. In a service also labels are used. Whenever you create a service, जो service हम बना रहे हैं, if you remember I said selector का concept होता है. Selector in services is very similar. कि यार you will just say कि whatever pods have app set to Nginx in their labels, those are the pods that the request will be forwarded to. So this is actually very important when you are starting a pod. जब एक pod start कर रहे हो, even if you are starting it via a deployment or a replica set, you need to have labels on it because whenever you create a service eventually जब आप service बनाओगे, तो service में you will use these labels so that the service knows which pod to forward the request to. Whichever pods have app set to Nginx, which is, let's say, this pod and this pod, request वहाँ जाएगी. If there are 10 more pods that don't have app set to Nginx in the labels, request will not go there. So we already have started our deployment. The next thing we have to do is start a service. API version v1, kind service. So This is the first time we are seeing a service manifest. We are not creating a pod, we are not creating a deployment. What are we creating? We're creating a service. Metadata, the name of the service. We are calling it Nginx service. You can call it Harkirat service, really depends on you. Specification, selector, app Nginx, as simple as that. जिस pod में app colon Nginx is present as one of the labels, उस pod पे request forward होगी. So if I go to item and do a k describe pods, you will see the one pod that I have, जिसका नाम Nginx है, it has this one label on it, app equal to Nginx. That is the same thing that we are filtering on in this service कि कौन से pod पे app Nginx true है. So when we start this service, it will definitely start to forward the request to the very first pod. क्योंकि जो पहला pod है उसमें अगर आप देखो app equal to Nginx label is there. I can start another pod. So if you look at manifest 2.yaml, ये एक और pod में start कर सकता हूँ. But इस pod में the labels are not present. What is the difference between manifest.yaml that I have locally and manifest2.yaml that I have locally? एक तो नाम का फर्क है. Here the name is Nginx. Here the name is Nginx2. But the bigger difference is this guy has some labels, specifically app colon Nginx. This guy does not have any labels. So even if I start this second container, this second pod, which is running the same thing also, it is running Nginx, it will still not, request will still not go there. Why? Because this second pod does not have app Nginx as one of the labels. If I add this, then it will be load balanced between both of them. So that is what this selector app Nginx over here means. App, this is how I will find who to forward the request to and load balance amongst them. Lastly, ports. कौन से ports हमें expose करने हैं? Protocol TCP, we have an HTTP server. Nginx is an HTTP server. HTTP on the lower layer starts on the TCP protocol. Port, इसको ignore करो. This has some sense for node port, but we'll come to that sense when we reach the next thing, which is the cluster IP resource or the cluster IP service. इसको अभी के लिए ignore करो कि port क्या करता है, नहीं पता हमें क्या करता है. We don't care either. Target port, कि जो final pod है उसके कौन से port पे service चल रही है. Service is probably the wrong word to use here. What port is the application exposed on the final pod? अब हमारे pod में Nginx कहाँ run कर रहा है? By default on port 80. Whenever you run docker run, when we were running docker run Nginx, we were saying right कि मेरी Mac का 8080 should point to Nginx का 80, because when you start the Nginx service, by default it is running on port 80. You can change that, but by default वो 80 पे run करती है. So here also the container that is running, that container's port 80 has Nginx running, or you can access it via port 80. That is what target port means. कि जो pod है उसके कौन से port पे चल रही है. Now if you have your own Node.js service there, where you're running an express server on port 3000, then you would mention 3000 here. Okay, target port is 3000. My Node.js application is running on port 3000. If you have Postgres running, then you will mention target port as 5432, because Postgres runs on 5432 by default. If you have Mongo, target port will be 27017. And lastly, node port, कि हमारा जो node है final, उसके कौन से port पे exposed होगी application. We're learning about the very first type of service, the node port service. इसमें which port of my nodes is the application exposed on? Is it we want to expose it on? Here you can only select a port in a specific range. अगर आप node port service use करते हो, which we are, if you look at it, type node port, the very first type of service is what we are using. तो unfortunately आपके node के वो एक specific port range पे ही चल सकती है, which starts from 30,000, I think ends at 50,000, just Google that. But it's not a standard port like 8080 or 80 or 443. It starts at 30,000. So unfortunately, you can expose your application, but it will always be on a very ugly looking URL like this. Something like this, colon 30,001, colon 30,001, colon 30,001. So does node port work? Yes. Can you expose your application using the node port service? Yes. Should you? No. Rarely, if at all, do you use this, but it gets the job done. We'll try it out very soon. So we are saying कि हमें एक नई सर्विस बनानी है जो कि नोड पोर्ट टाइप की होगी. इस पोर्ट पे हमारे नोड्स के नोड पोर्ट हमारे नोड्स के इस पोर्ट पे that specific application will be accessible and it will forward the request to all the pods जिन पे ये label set है on this specific target port. Ignore what this is for now. Let's try it out. Let me copy. Let me create a service.yaml now. Let me paste this inside service.yaml. Let me do a k apply -f service. Service has been created. If I do a k get service now, k get svc, you will notice there is a default Kubernetes cluster IP service. Ignore that for now. There is another Nginx service that has been created of type node port. Cluster IP is over here. Ignore this IP. This is again not relevant. And some port mapping over here. The target port is 80. Node port is 3000 or whatever, 30,007. अब सवाल ये है कि हमारे जो नोड्स चल रहे हैं, what is the IP of these 3 nodes? We have a local Kubernetes setup. Unfortunately, we don't have a DigitalOcean Kubernetes setup where after I did this, all I had to do was go to my DigitalOcean nodes कि अच्छा यार कौन से nodes हैं यहाँ पे, अच्छा ये 3 nodes हैं. I could have just seen the IP of these nodes. There are ways to get the IP and simply gone to IP colon 30,007. काम मेरा चल जाता. But locally node का मतलब क्या है? Where is this node running? We are using kind Kubernetes inside Docker. It is running some virtual nodes on your own machine. Unfortunately, आपकी खुद की मशीन पे ही चल रहे हैं. तो ऐसा तो है नहीं कि this is IP1.100xfs.com, server2.100xfs.com. These are sort of running on my own machine. How am I running Kubernetes right now? I have my Mac machine, inside which I am running 3 Docker containers. Docker container 1, Docker container 2, Docker container 3. This is the master node. And these are the worker nodes. So the question is, I have started a node port service. What is the IP of the master node? What is the IP of the worker node? These are Docker containers. This is a Docker container. We have started a node port service. मतलब यहाँ पे 3007 पे कुछ exposed है. Sorry, 30,007 पे कुछ exposed है. Here also 30,007 something is exposed. Here also 30,007 something is exposed. But unfortunately, on our Mac machine, I don't have a port mapping from some port, let's say 30,007, to these ports. So unfortunately, if you are using kind, आपने सब सही करा है. आपने kind use किया to start the Kubernetes cluster on your Mac machine. You created a pod that is running Nginx. Great. You created a service, you created a pod, you created a service which is of type node port. अब ideally तीनों nodes के port 3000, 30,007 पे this Nginx pod is exposed. But what is the problem? Problem is these nodes are themselves Docker containers. ये nodes खुद ही अभी Docker containers हैं. This is not a DigitalOcean or a production cluster. This is my local test setup that I have. अब अगर एक Docker container होता जहां Mongo run हो रहा होता, if there was a Docker container where Mongo was running and Mongo was exposed on 27017 here, how would have I exposed this on my Mac machine? I would have added a port mapping, right? KR 27017. Please point to 27017 over here. So similarly, even though everything is right in these 3 Docker containers, we have created a pod, we have created a service to expose the pod. Since these don't have their own IPs, they are running on the same Mac machine. इसके 30,007 पे कुछ चलने लग गया है. Same for this, same for this. Node port service बनाई है हमने. हर नोड के पोर्ट पे चल रही है वो स्पेसिफिक प्रोसेस, यू नो व्हाटएवर any request that comes here will get forwarded here. We should add a port mapping from the Mac machine to one of these containers so that हम actually उस पर पहुंच पाएं, हम actually इसको टेस्ट कर पाएं. Again, this is all for testing purposes because हम local in a very weird way we're starting Kubernetes. For testing it locally, you need to expose your Mac machine's port, any port 3000, 30,000 as a mapping to 30,007 on one of these Docker containers. तभी आप यहाँ पे request भेज पाओगे. Then you will see that request get forward to Nginx. So even though we have done everything right, we will not need to do this extra step on a Kubernetes cluster, a production Kubernetes cluster. Locally हमें एक extra step करना पड़ेगा. हमें kind configuration को थोड़ा सा change करना पड़ेगा. We have changed the kind configuration a little bit. कि यार 2 workers start करो, that is fine. The master node that you are starting, right? Add an extra port mapping over here. Okay, container port 30,007 should have a port mapping to the host port 30,007. ये चीज समझ आ रही है? This extra port mapping I am adding in my kind configuration. I am telling कि यार ये जो Kubernetes cluster start हो रहा है ना locally, the Kubernetes cluster that is starting, जो उसका master node है, on the master node, please add a port mapping from 30,007 to the Mac machine to 30,007 on the master node, so that when we start a node port service and when we start to independently hit it, we can hit it through this 30,000 port on the Mac machine. इसका Mac machine का 30,000 port will point to master node का 30,000 port will point to the Nginx service. Let's do a poll and try to see how many of us understand this. This would have been very easy if we were using DigitalOcean directly. We are not, which is why it's a little complicated. घोड़े खुल के हैं 4 guys, हालत हो गई है खराब guys, कोई इशू नहीं. एक बारी को लोकल सेटअप को हटाते हैं. Leave the local setup for just a few minutes for. ये रहा एक नया fresh yellow Kubernetes cluster over here. I have a fresh Kubernetes cluster over here. Let me download its configuration. Let me click on manual over here, download the configuration file. ये नहीं समझ आया तो we have discussed this yesterday. But let me connect to my DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster. This is the file that was downloaded. Let me copy this file. This is the password to my DigitalOcean Kubernetes cluster. Let me go to the .cube folder and यहाँ पे let me paste this specific file that I just added, which was, I think, this file, right? 132, yeah. Now let me copy this file to config, and now I'm connected to my DigitalOcean cluster. If you did not understand it, it's fine. You probably don't have a DigitalOcean cluster right now, right? I have a DigitalOcean cluster. I have a Kubernetes cluster on DigitalOcean. And now I am connected from my terminal to this production Kubernetes cluster. ये किसको समझ आया? How many of us understand what I did in the last 1 minute? You might not understand how to do it on your side, but do you understand what I have done यहाँ पे? I have created a new Kubernetes cluster. I did this before the class, in the beginning of the class, if you remember. I said connecting to Kubernetes. अब मुझे अपने Kubernetes cluster से connect करना है. I downloaded the cluster configuration. I pasted it in my .cube folder in this config file. And now when I do a kget nodes, it is showing me 3 nodes that exist on my DigitalOcean cluster. Notice they started 28 minutes ago. इनका जो नाम यहाँ पे है, the same name exists over here. This pool has 3 nodes. I also see 3 nodes over here. Do we understand this? Let's do a poll. Okay, when I do a kget pods now, the pods in my DigitalOcean cluster, I mean, kget nodes now. That means nodes in my Kubernetes cluster. Kget deployments now. Kubernetes cluster. How many of us understand this? Let's do a poll. Do we understand अभी मैंने क्या किया 1 minute में? This we all understand. This also we sort of understand, 82%. Okay, dokie. Let me proceed. I'll do questions, doubts. Let's just stick to services today. Let's not do namespaces. ठीक है भाई. Now, let me apply the same manifest.yaml which is this pod manifest k apply -f manifest.yaml this time to my DigitalOcean cluster. अब मैंने अपने DigitalOcean cluster में Nginx चला दिया, local cluster में नहीं. That is why notice it's taking some time to start because my DigitalOcean machines are now pulling the image from Docker Hub and starting them. Now it is running. I have a pod running. Notice how cool this is कि मेरे को 1 सेकंड लगा अपनी एप्लीकेशन को डिप्लॉय करने में. I was able to deploy not my application, the Nginx Docker Hub image, but in like 1 second. अगर मैं वर्चुअल मशीन पे करता तो मुझे पहले SSH करना पड़ता. I would have SSH'd first, then I would have done a git pull or whatever. I installed Docker, then I would have done a Docker run, whatever port mapping Nginx. 3 steps it would have taken. यहाँ पे I did it in a declarative way. So I created a manifest.yaml and I applied it to my Kubernetes cluster. If I do a k get pods, I see my pod is running. If I do a k logs -f Nginx, I see the Nginx logs as well. If I do a k describe pod, I will see my pod is running on this node pool 37j3m whatever -6e_pr5. So pr5, this one right here. Now I'm going to do one more thing. I'm going to apply the service. This is the service that we had written. अभी तक मैंने सिर्फ pod apply किया है. I am now applying the service as well. API version v1, which means first version of Kubernetes में kind service was introduced. So service is what we want to create. This is the name of the service. This is the specification of the service. Whatever pod has app set to Nginx in the labels, whatever pod has app set to Nginx, वहाँ पे request forward होगी. And these are the ports. Here, whatever the target port on the pod is port 80, the node port is 30,007. मतलब तीनों के तीनों machines के IP:30,007 will forward to a specific pod. Let me apply this. kubectl apply service.yaml. Now if I do kubectl get service, it says a node port service has been started. 30,007 bit is exposed, but this IP looks incorrect to me. I could be wrong, but most probably this is the wrong IP. So now I need to find in तीनों machines में से किसी एक machine का IP address. I have created a node port service. I have one pod running. I have one service of my own running. This service is of type node port. मतलब तीनों nodes के एक specific port पे हमने इस service को expose किया है. What is that port? 30,007. Now I need to find in तीनों में से किसी एक का IP address. वो हमें देखना पड़ेगा कैसे निकलेगा. I can think of one very quick way. कि I look at my .cube/config file and I will see यहाँ पे URL क्या है where we are connecting. So there we go. This is my master node URL that I found from my kubectl config, and if I go to this :30,007, let me see if I can get the IP of the node. Give me 1 second, just try to see what's up. First time I'm trying node port on DigitalOcean, so maybe I'm missing something as well. Let's see, does it work? This is my master node IP address, colon 30,007 is my port where I've exposed it. If this doesn't work, we'll do it on CVO, because CVO pe to I can easily get the IP of a specific pod, or sorry, node. But let me show what I was doing. Kget nodes, kdescribe nodes. Let's see if we can get the IP somehow from here. There you go, external IP. There we go. So now my application is exposed on the internet. How did I find कि मेरे node की IP क्या है? I did a kubectl describe nodes, and the very first node, this will describe all three of my nodes. The very first node which has this name, उसकी मैंने external IP उठाई यहाँ से, and if I go to the external IP colon 30,007, I reach the Nginx service. Beautiful. Sorry, the Nginx pod that is running. So I only have one pod and one service, which is good enough to expose your application on the internet. सिर्फ इन दो फाइल्स से, these are the only two files that I have applied to my Kubernetes cluster. मैंने अप्लाई करी, मेरी एप्लीकेशन इंटरनेट पे रेडी है. Of course, it is not on HTTPS. It is on an ugly looking port, but it's still there. My application is deployed on the internet. Zero effort to pull something on a VM, start it, expose it, Nginx, कुछ नहीं. I started a pod. Now this could be my backend service. This could be your Express server. This could be a Next.js frontend. In our case, we picked a random image. And this is the service, the thing that we were learning about today. कि हाँ भाई, if you want to expose a pod of yours to the world, you will have to create a service. Our service has this selector. मतलब जौन सा pod है, whichever pod has these labels, app nginx, which this pod does, the request will be forwarded there or load balanced amongst them. And this is the port mapping. Okay, node port 30,007 पे on all the nodes, on all the 2 worker nodes, 1 master node, किसी के भी 30,007 पे चले जाओ, then it will forward the request to port 80 of this specific pod, क्योंकि अभी हमने एक ही pod start किया. If I start 10 pods, let me start another pod and give it the same labels, then the request will load balance amongst them. तो हम यहाँ पे देखेंगे कि is it being load balanced or not. We'll do that next. But now I have 3 nodes. Let me describe them again. Even if I look at the last node and uski external IP, which is this is the first one that we already have. This is the second one. So even if I go to the second node colon 30,007, I reach. So doesn't matter if you visit it on this node colon 30,007 or this node colon 30,007 or this node colon 30,007, you are able to reach the final Nginx port because we use the node port type of service, pehle type ki service. Let's do a poll. Do we understand this on a DigitalOcean cluster? Locally, there are some problems, very complicated. We are using kind inside, Kubernetes inside Docker, very complicated. But ये समझ आ रहा है कि DigitalOcean पे कैसे चल गया ये? Let's do a poll. Time for a Q&A, guys. So it's 75%. So I'm going to look at Q&A for a while now. And आप सवाल पूछे, हम जवाब देंगे. After copying DigitalOcean, I did not see pods. I cannot see the pod. What I'm missing? You have probably not created the pods. Initially, मुझे भी, when I was doing kget pods, I was seeing nothing. I applied my manifest, right? I did a k apply -f service. उसके बाद ही मुझे दिखी, sorry, pod. उसके बाद मुझे दिखी. How does sending a request to any node redirect to the actual pod in another node while using node port? So is the pod deployed on all nodes? No, the pod is not deployed on all nodes, but there is very strong internal networking amongst them. All nodes know each other's IP. I don't know if that's true, but the master node for sure knows, कि ये है. They know all each other. They can very quickly visit each other on the internal DigitalOcean network. So no, you don't have the pod running everywhere. In fact, master node पे कुछ run नहीं होता है. But there is internal networking through which, the request that's coming here is slowly going here, response is coming back and, going to the original user. More questions. How does sending, okay, answer that. Does Nodeboard service start a process for forwarding every request to every single node in the cluster? So that's a good question. We'll eventually learn about ingress, where this is definitely true. Okay, a process, in fact, a pod is started that takes the initial request and forwards it. I don't think that is true for service. I could be wrong, but node pod service way, is there a new pod that is starting over here, or just all the incoming requests through some network layer protocol is being forwarded over here? I don't know. I would assume there is some process that is running that is handling the incoming request on port 30,007 and forwarding it. But is it a new process, or is it like an existing master node, or every node process that is running? Probably it's an existing process that already runs. When you redeploy or create a new node port service, I don't think the new process is starting, but I could be wrong on this. How DigitalOcean is doing that? Like they are also using kind? No. So kind is just for local development. No one uses kind. DigitalOcean doesn't use kind. DigitalOcean actually runs / Kubernetes master, a binary like this on this machine, and / Kubernetes worker, a binary like this on this machine, and a binary like this on this machine. It is not using Docker or kind to start the server. Small recap of Kubernetes service. I will do that. Explain internal networking. What do you mean by that? So we always need master node IP. How will we scale if the master node crashes? We don't need a master node IP. Any one of these works. This one :30,007. This one :30,007. This one :30,007. The question is, how do you scale? The good thing is you never use this. Rarely, if at all, you will use the node port type of service. It's the easiest to expose your application, but you will never use this. But to answer your question, you can use any one of these. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि एक ही specific node पे request बहुत ज़्यादा आ जाएगी. Can you please explain how the pod autoscaling works here? Let's reach pod autoscaling when we do. Today we're learning about networking services, external traffic coming to the Kubernetes cluster. Hence, let's not go to the pod autoscaling bit right now. A bit surprised that when you create a Kubernetes cluster on a shared CPU, you can hog ports like that. You mean on a DigitalOcean machine? How is that any different from a VM? When you're starting a VM with shared CPU, same thing happens, right? You have ports, you have a node where you can do whatever you want, and all the exports are owned by you. How are they registering domain real time? They are not. There is no domain here. Master node की सिर्फ IP डाली है मैंने. I have not created a domain over here. How you attach a domain to it is a different question that will come eventually. अभी के लिए I'm just hitting any of the nodes :30,007 and I'm able to reach my pod. Nodes are not container like Docker. Then what? A node is a machine. If you go over here in DigitalOcean and you see this is a node pool, which means a pool of machines. This is a normal DigitalOcean machine, जैसी usually होती है. If I start a normal DigitalOcean virtual machine, this is exactly the same thing. Only difference is this is running the Kubernetes master node ka code by default. This is running the Kubernetes worker node ka code by default. This is running the Kubernetes worker node ka code. But these are normal machines. They are not a Docker container. They are not running using kind. These are three different machines that are running Kubernetes code. One of them is running the master node, the code of the master worker or master node, and the other two are running the code of the worker node. So they're basically running this, जो हमने architecture में शुरू में discuss किया था, right? The master node is running something like this. So one of these machines, let's say this one, is running an API server, running etcd, running kube scheduler, running kube controller manager, running kube cloud controller manager, a bunch of these things. The other two, let's say this one and this one, they are running, these services. They're running a kubelet, they're running a kube proxy, they're running the container runtime. That is what is running on these normal DigitalOcean machines. How is it reaching the original pod where Nginx is running if two pods are running on the same port? So how master will know which Nginx is running? how is it reaching the original pod where Nginx is running? If there is two pods running on the same port, how master will know which pod Nginx is running? Okay. I went to DigitalOcean. I created a new Kubernetes cluster, which means I created a master node. I created worker node 1. That's my current Kubernetes cluster, right? And then worker node 2. Then I deployed my very first pod. Let's say deployed over here. This is the Nginx pod. इस pod के अंदर there is a container. There is just one container which is running Nginx, which is exposed on port 80. Something like this is our current setup without the service. अगर मैंने सिर्फ एक manifest apply करी, if I just applied this, let's say, if this is the only manifest I apply, it starts a pod over here. इतना सबको समझ आ गया था, हमने locally भी किया है, I have done it on DigitalOcean as well. Then what did I say? कि no one can access this. I want to create another service. This is what? This is a pod. I created a service after this, or applied a service to the Kubernetes cluster, which looks like this. That's the second thing we did. When this service got applied, उसके बाद क्या हुआ? Now, every machine, either one of these three, on port 3007 or sorry 30,007 is now 30,007. This port on all three of these machines is now forwarding the request to this Nginx pod on port 80. So, यहाँ machine पे भी anything that's running on port 30,007, and even this third machine, anything that's running on port 30,007 is forwarding the request to this specific Nginx container. So I can go to worker node 1 or master node IP colon 30,007. I will see the Nginx page. Master node 2 or worker node 2 colon 30,007. I will reach here. Worker node 1 30,007. I will reach over here. वो यहाँ पे हो रहा. This is the worker node colon 30,007. I reach the pod. This was the master node 30,007. I reached the pod. तो मेरी application expose हो गई. All I had to do was create a pod, create a service. Service में मैंने एक चीज mention करी कि यार this is my selector, which means any pod which has these labels वहां पे request forward होगी. Any pod that has app colon nginx label present, which this pod does, this request will forward over here. अगर मैं एक और pod चला दूं, if I start another pod, which let's say is running MongoDB, it's running what? It will run the MongoDB image. इसका नाम भी मैं MongoDB रखूंगा. Name will be MongoDB as well. I will replace everything with Mongo. उसका container port क्या होगा? It will be 5432 unfortunately. तो इसके तो 5432 पे application exposed होगी. I want to somehow create a pod जहाँ पे भी port 80 हो ताकि मैं आपको load balancing दिखा पाता. What I want to do is start another pod that is not Nginx. That is something else. Let's say, does anyone know any Docker image that runs on port 80 other than Nginx? क्या किसी को, I'm opening chat. Does anyone know any other Docker image that runs on port 80 by default? Apache does it? And HTTPD. HTTPD is a good one. ठीक है. So let me replace this with HTTPD, 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 which also runs on 80 by default. तो अब मैं एक और सर्विस चला दूंगा. वहां पे I will have the same labels, and now requests will get load balanced amongst this, and this. So all three nodes will now load balance request amongst these two pods. Let's try that out. Abhi ke liye, we only have this. Let me make this a little clearer. Abhi ke liye, we only have one Nginx pod. Any request that's coming over here is going over here. Any request that's coming over here is going over here. Any request that comes over here goes over here. You can clearly see that here. बार बार हमें Nginx पेज ही दिख रहा है. अब I will start another pod which is not running Nginx. It's running HTTPD. तो पहले मैं quickly locally देखता हूँ कि when I run docker run -p 3000:80 HTTPD, तो do I see something running locally on port 3000? Let's see. कुछ तो आ रहा है. It works आ रहा है. बहुत बढ़िया. तो now I will copy manifest.yaml to manifest-httpd.yaml. I will open manifest-httpd.yaml and I will replace Nginx everywhere with what? HTTPD. Except this label, unfortunately, app Nginx he has service pay. The service still has app Nginx. I can make this something else. App load balancers, because you know Nginx is a popular load balancer. HTTP is something similar. So I can give it a better name. Okay, you know, whatever. App port 80 applications. Unfortunately, मैंने इसको नाम अभी ऐसा दिया हुआ है app Nginx, which isn't too relevant for HTTPD. But HTTPD के लिए I'll maintain the same labels अभी के लिए. Okay, app Nginx is the label. बाकी something I will change. This is the most important thing. Okay, the image is not Nginx anymore. It's HTTPD. So now I am starting another pod which is not running Nginx. It will run HTTPD. That's mentioned over here. But उसके labels में अभी भी app Nginx है. That means this service will forward the request to the second pod as well, because इस pod में भी and इस pod में भी both the pods have this label present. If I remove the label from here or make this something else, app Nginx 2, then the request from this service will not go to this pod. They will only go to this pod. So let me exit from here. Cube apply -f manifest httpd.yaml. Now I have two pods. Pod number 1, pod number 2. The first pod has the labels app equal to Nginx. The second pod has the labels app equal to Nginx. Are both of them running? Both of them are running. Now, if I go here, I reach Nginx. I reach HTTPD का page. I keep refreshing. Let me open it in Brave. I reach Nginx. यहाँ पे I reach HTTPD. तो दिख रहा है. Now the request is being load balanced amongst this guy as well as this guy, because both of them have these labels. This labels and this selector is what connects the service to the pods जहाँ पे request finally चाहिए. अब मैंने दो अलग pod start कर दिए. The first pod also has app Nginx as the label. Second pod also has app Nginx as a label. So now any request that's coming on this port or this port or this port, sorry, this IP, this IP, this IP, they'll load balance request between this guy and this guy. That is why sometimes I see HTTP landing page here. Sometimes I will see the Nginx landing page here. Do we now understand the concept of services? I'm looking at Q&A until then. In what scenario do we need more than one pods on the same node? So your pods can crash, right? You might have an application fault. So if you have a backend service, you might want to have 3 pods with some resource limits. Yeah, एक pod 2 GB से ज़्यादा नहीं लेगा RAM, or you know, it won't take more than 1 vCPU. And you can start 5 such pods. It's a better idea to start 5 pods with some resource limits than just one pod which can infinitely use all the resources. Can we do a poll? Do we now understand this? Load balancing is enabled in Kubernetes. So I'm just using the term load balancing. It's the service is randomly going from, app engine, this pod to this pod to this pod to this pod. वो उस पे depend करता है service पे. But is it load balancing? It's sort of load balancing. And yes, you can say it's just round robin picking of pods, right? कि कभी इस pod को भेजना है, इस pod को भेजना है, that's it. So if you modify service.yaml to spin up a new service, it starts load balancing the old one and the new one together. So if you modify service.yaml service, it starts load balancing the old and the new one together. No. So if I start another service, that will be on a different port on the nodes, right? So it will be on port 30,008, let's say. So all three machines ka port 30,008 then will start to forward requests to a different port. So if you service start karoge, that will probably be for your backend. Let's say this was for your front end. This will be for your backend pods. So the requests that are coming here will get forwarded to your backend pods. And there's no load balancing amongst these two. So 30,007 pe aa raha hai, he's reaching the front end pods. So 30,008 pe aa raha hai, he's reaching the backend pods. The IP you're using is of master node. You can use any. You can use master node IP, you can use worker node IP. I don't know which one of these this is, but it could be anything. If you modify some answer that, like domain name hosting is different thing. How can we create a domain like domain name? You have created a external IP. How do So and why always the name with username.com always logged? I don't know what your second question is, but to answer your first question is as simple as going to godaddy.com. So whatever. Domains.squarespace.com. Pick your IP from here, which is whatever 139.59.14.7. Go to your domains. And you just point the IP over there. Basically, how you would do it otherwise. Then you can go to app.indexdevs.com:30,007. Your request will go over there. Any other questions before we proceed? Iske baad, I don't know what I did. Any other questions before we proceed? Stress testing. How do you scale a Kubernetes cluster horizontally? So it's pretty simple. If you go to, for DigitalOcean, for example, it's different for every provider, but you can see when you are creating a node pool, it lets you do two things, resize or auto scale. So you can just select, your minimum number of nodes and your maximum number of nodes. And then it would auto scale amongst them, but there are a few things you have to know before that. Like you have to add resource constraints so that it knows that I need more nodes, or now I'm free, I need lesser nodes. But yeah, basically giving the port range or the node range is as simple as this. Uske baad there are a few more things. Does Vercel use Kubernetes? I don't know. I mean, no idea. Very hard for me to predict, right? Does Google use Kubernetes? Yeah, probably they do, but does Facebook use? I don't know. After copying DigitalOcean Kubernetes file, I tried, did not see this thing. You applied the service. I tried applying service.yaml, but still shows local pod. Anything we need. After copying DigitalOcean tools, I did not see. Wait, just one thing. What is the folder name where you have copied it? .cube/config. It is this. It is not config.yaml or something. It's simply .cube folder mein file jiska naam is config. It's not config.txt. That might be the one thing you might be missing. Maybe Kubernetes reverse proxies for each time. Yeah, probably. If we use the IP of the worker, then it is load balancing thing will still work. Just because you are here doesn't mean request yahan jayegi. It can go here as well. There will be some round robining happening. It is not. अरे यार इस हो सकता है कि इस specific node पे no pod is running with those labels. So of course it will have to be forwarded, right? So it's not necessary. If you are coming over here on a worker node, it will reach here. It can reach the other guy as well. For example, Hotstar have created more than one pods. I mean, this is a very specific question. Hotstar ka which portion that you are assuming to be deployed on Kubernetes where you need more than one pod? Specify that. Maybe in a Notion bug. I'm happy to answer that after the call. Is Kubernetes for backend? It's used for everything, front end, backend. Yeah, let's do it. So let's proceed to the next section. We understood the very first type of Kubernetes service, which was node port. We only have 45 minutes left. Let's do load balancer next. And then cluster IP bach jayegi, which is also very important. But next week or offline video, we will see. Load balancer service, very simple. If you understand node port, you'll understand load balancer service, the second type of service. So this was the very first type. There are three types of services: cluster IP, node port, and load balancer. Let's understand the load balancer service. And यहाँ पे you will learn something very interesting about Kubernetes. कि we've kept on saying that Kubernetes is cloud native, which means you can easily move from AWS to DigitalOcean to Azure. But is that really true? There is a very small nuance. In Kubernetes, a load balancer type service is a way to expose a service to the external clients. Harkirat node port service does the same thing. Why do you need a load balancer service? We're coming to it very soon. When you create a service of type load balancer, Kubernetes will automatically provision an external load balancer from your cloud provider. Example AWS, GCP, and Azure to route traffic to your Kubernetes service. So, the first question is, if it does something very similar to node port, so why do you need load balancer service? Fresh banate hain. This is a Kubernetes cluster. We saw, or let's look at the simpler diagram that we had, which was this one right here. This is the one that we were dealing with, right? This does almost everything we need, right? You have external traffic going to various points. Problem is, your Kubernetes cluster IP is exposed to the world. Your Kubernetes cluster IP, everyone can see. Second problem is, the port range can never be 443 or 80. The port range is, something much more wider. It starts from 30,000. It goes up to 50,000. The third thing is, you can't make this secure. And this probably points to the fact that there is no process that is running, that is handling your request. There is just internal networking karte you reach the process, because there is no SSL termination that happens over here. What is SSL termination? SSL termination is it's a non-Kubernetes concept. SSL termination का मतलब ये होता है कि if some HTTPS request is coming, the certificate validation happens पहले in a process, and then you send a simple HTTP request आगे. SSL termination कि external request is coming, जहाँ पहले process पे आई, वहाँ पे you check कि is this an HTTPS valid certificate, and then you forward the request आगे. All of these things you can't do in a node port service. जो node port service है, वो SSL termination नहीं कर सकती. मतलब basically you can't run it on HTTPS. Number 2, you will always have an ugly looking port. Number 3, your worker node IP or your master node IP will be exposed to the world. That is a problem. This is where the load balancer service comes to the picture. If you remember on AWS, there was a load balancer section. We have seen this in EC2, and when we were going through EC2 machines. If you notice DigitalOcean as well, you will see there is a probably be networking. There is a section for creating load balancers. There you go. Even in DigitalOcean, there is a section for creating load balancers, not necessarily for Kubernetes. EC2 mein, we have created load balancers for auto-scaling groups. We have created load balancers for ECS. Here, you can create load balancers for their droplets. कि आपके 4 droplets हैं, you want to load balance amongst them, create a load balancer. Attach the 4 droplets there. But the same load balancer can be used for connecting to a Kubernetes cluster. So, how does our architecture change? Oh, seriously. How does our architecture change? We won't be exposing node ports anymore. We don't want our IP to be exposed to the world. But in the end, whenever the user wants to visit us, they will visit us on some app.honeyducksdevs.com, right? Which will point to an IP. ये IP किस machine की होगी? Will it be master node IP? No. Will it be worker node 1 IP? No. Worker node 2 IP? No. It will be the IP of a external load balancer. The key word here being external. External load balancer, which will forward the request to, whichever service you want. This one and, the other one. It will load balance amongst this guy and this guy. Rather than exposing your ports on your master node and worker node, एक external load balancer बना लेते हैं. What does external mean? Okay, it no longer exists in your Kubernetes cluster. It is not worker node or master node. This is your Kubernetes cluster. This is something outside your Kubernetes cluster. So one interesting thing about Kubernetes, even though people say it's cloud native, आज की डेट में कोई नया क्लाउड प्रोवाइडर अगर आता है, if I come and create Kirat Cloud, unless I have load balancers in there, I will not be able to compete with AWS, with GCP. The cloud provider, should have load balancers as a construct. Only then will people move from AWS to me. This is not related to Kubernetes. This is the AWS ka or GCP ka or DigitalOcean ka normal load balancer. It is not a Kubernetes load balancer. It is the standard load balancer that exists in AWS, the standard load balancers that exists in DigitalOcean. The reason it's interesting is because now Kubernetes doesn't feel like it's too cloud native. If there is a new cloud provider, you can't create load balancers there. They don't have a concept of load balancers. They only have machines right now. Eventually, after 3 years, they will hire developers and add load balancers, but they don't have load balancers today. So that is why Kubernetes has one very interesting property. It does a lot of cloud specific stuff as well. It creates resources outside the cluster, creates resources, creates a load balancer, creates some storage ka space to backup data of Postgres, let's say. हम उस पे आएंगे eventually. But these are external components, which means it is not these three machines. It is a fourth thing that has been created. One very common thing you will see is that you will destroy your Kubernetes cluster. कि यार हो गया मेरा, I have done my testing, I will delete it. You will forget to delete your external load balancer because it's not part of your cluster. So, and you will be billed for it. I have been billed. I can show you the bill on Vultr for $8 for like 6 months because I closed my Kubernetes cluster, forgot to delete the external load balancer. So the second type of service that we're learning about, the load balancer service, has one unique property, which is this is another cloud provider called Vultr. Yahan pe bhi there is a section called load balancers. If this is your Kubernetes cluster, it will exist on this page. If you create a service of type load balancer, यहाँ पे क्लाउड में एक नई चीज बन जाएगी भाई. मतलब आप somehow AWS की कुछ CLI को कॉल करोगे and that will provision a new load balancer inside Kubernetes, inside the cloud provider. So that is the load balancer service. Why is it cool? It's cool because you will have SSL termination, you will attach to domain names. ये तो हमने कर रखा है, right? In AWS we had the load balancer. I showed you how do you add an HTTPS certificate over here. So your final application is deployed on HTTPS. SSL termination happens over here. मतलब इसके आगे आपको certificate को verify करने की जरूरत नहीं है. The load balancer will verify that the certificate is correct. And all around the world, people only see your external load balancer IP. They don't see your master node IP. They don't see your worker node IP. So people can interact with you using the external load balancer. That is what the load balancer service is. So abhi we had created service of type what? Node port. This is what we had done abhi tak. Now we're going to replace this with service of type load balancer. If you look at the slide, create a deployment. We're not creating a deployment. We already have pods in there. Create service-load balancer.yaml. Kind service, metadata name, whatever you want to name it. Specification, this is the selector. Ports, port TCP. Port of the load balancer, 80. Target port on the pod, 80. Type load balancer. Khatam. This one manifest is dangerous. Why is it dangerous, Harkirat? It's creating an external load balancer. Uska alag charge hoga. You are being charged for 3 machines right now. As soon as you apply this manifest, a load balancer is created that you will be charged, let's say, $10 a month for. So this is sort of like infrastructure as code. This is code that is going to start a load balancer in your AWS console or in your DigitalOcean console. Let's try it out. We service-load balancer.yaml, paste it. इसका नाम मैं कुछ और दे देता हूँ. I will name this Nginx service load balancer because I already have Nginx service, right? Or if you want, you can delete the service. So delete the old service, Nginx service, k delete service Nginx service. Kubectl delete service, Nginx service. Now this will no longer be accessible. If I go to incognito, I can no longer access it. मैंने service delete कर दी. If I reapply the service, I will be able to access it again. I have deleted the service. Now let me apply the load balancer service. So what was it called? I called it service-lb. It says service/load balancer created. Beautiful. Kget svc. It says, yeah, service has been created. A load balancer type of service has been created. इसका external IP is pending अभी. मतलब अभी load balancer बनना शुरू हुआ है. If I go to DigitalOcean and go to my load balancers, notice a new load balancer is added over here. ये दो मेरे पास पहले से थे. A third load balancer got added. It is similar to me coming over here and creating a new load balancer. I could have created one manually. Kubernetes created one when I applied the load balancer service. There is not a lot of difference in the manifest files. They look very similar. If you look at service and service load balancer, this is the second type of service that we have created, service load balancer. Notice they're very similar. The only difference is type node port, type load balancer. Node port only makes sense if you're using node port. यहाँ पे doesn't make sense. Port and target port. कहाँ पे container पे process run हो रही है? What port I wanted exposed on my load balancer. What did applying this do? It created an external load balancer. It created this thing right here. As you can see, it is provisioning right now. But as soon as this load balancer provisions, I can visit my website on external load balancer IP, on this IP. I don't need master node IP, I don't need worker node IP. I can simply hit the external load balancer IP and reach the right ports. Look at it here, it is done. The specific load balancer is deployed on 68.183.244.84. So if I go over here, I will reach the Nginx pod, or the, in this case I reach the HTTPD pod, but if I keep on refreshing, I'll reach, or if I go to the Brave browser, I reach the Nginx pod. So do we understand the second type of service, the load balancer service, the one that you will use? Isme to, now all I have to do is go to domains.squarespace.com and replace, add an entry for this specific domain. So if I go to domains, I go to 100xdevs.com, I go to DNS, I add another record here. Whatever, kubernetes class.100xdevs.com should point to this specific IP address. Save. And now if I wait a minute, and after a minute I go to kts class.100xdevs.com, I see the Nginx page. And if I keep refreshing, I'll see the HTTPD page. So, I was able to create an external load balancer. I was able to attach the IP to my domain name, and I was able to, reach this. I still don't have HTTPS. How do you do that? It's very simple, right? Go to your load balancer, what do you call it? Dashboard here. Manage networking. Select the load balancer, let's say this one. And here I'm sure there is a place where you can put your certificate credentials. So, settings, SSL, there you go. Add a certificate. We can follow the whole doc, but basically it's very easy to add SSL. It's very easy to convert this to https://kts class.100xdevs.com. On AWS, we've already done this. On DigitalOcean, there are some steps that we can follow. That's the second type of service, which is the load balancer service. आज हमें क्या क्या करना था? We had to understand three types of services. Node port, which means आपके nodes पे application exposed है. Load balancer, which means there is an external load balancer that is provisioned. this guy right here, where when you forward the request, it whatever reaches the send the respective process, and there is SSL termination over here, which means HTTPS request will end over here. Iske aage there will be a simple HTTP request. You don't have to do SSL checks over here, and only the external load balancer IP is exposed to the world. Nothing else is. The problem is that if you by mistake close your Kubernetes cluster or destroy it, you will forget to destroy this as well. So it is a good idea to right now itself k get svc, k delete svc, just delete this load balancer service. So your load balancer is deleted from DigitalOcean as well. Otherwise, you'll be charged for it. Cool. That's the second type of service, the load balancer service. Did we understand it? Let's do a poll. Do we understand the second type of service, which creates a external thing called the load balancer? I'll look at Q&A until then. 86%. I think that's decent. 87%. That's beautiful. So pretty good. 832 हो गए हैं. Shall we quickly finish the third type of service as well, the cluster IP service, or do you want to pause now? Because I know it's a heavy class. Let's do a poll. Should I continue to cluster IP service? Yes or no? If the answer is no, I'll do EMA. I have a hard stop at 9:55. So based on that, decide. Should we continue to the cluster IP service? Yes or no? So no wins by a whisker. 54% say no, 46% say yes. For the people who selected yes, पिछले cohort में we didn't even discuss cluster IP. ऊपर से we discussed. Now I have actual use cases for it because now I deploy databases internally. But मैं थोड़ा overview दे देता हूँ and then I'll do it in an offline video next week. Although this is like a 20-minute thing, so I'll probably just do a 20-minute offline video right after this one. This is used for internal networking. The name is giving it away, cluster IP. Unfortunately, pods can't talk to each other. Even though they exist right next to each other in the same worker node, they can't talk. To make two pods talk internally is when you create a cluster IP service. Name is giving it away, cluster IP. एक IP जो सिर्फ cluster में accessible होगी, an IP that is only accessible inside the cluster and not outside. So if you ever have a database that you have deployed in your Kubernetes cluster, you should have a cluster IP service so that your Node.js process can talk to it, but no one outside the world can talk to it. It's only exposed inside the cluster. That's what the third type of services. Again, I don't think it's even in the slides. That's not in the slides. The slides just has just a pictorial representation of what happens when you create a load balancer. So I'll do another video on cluster IPs, on cluster IPs. Is it useful? You will not need it until you are self-hosting databases or self-hosting Kafka or self-hosting Redis, which is things people use external providers for, or managed services like RDS or NeonDB or AVN. So because people don't self-host databases, you might not need it. But if you are thinking of self-hosting databases, which we do, which is a good idea also, because it's debatable, a very long discussion of it's a good idea or bad idea. But if you want to do it, you will need cluster IP. Otherwise, if you don't want to expose your application externally, then cluster IP is needed. Most of the times, the applications that you are creating, a Node.js backend, a React frontend, a Next.js frontend, you will want it exposed on the internet. So in that case, it doesn't matter. Okay, cool. I'll do Q&A and whatever for the next 20 minutes or Notion docs if you guys want, and then we can call it. Cluster IP service I'll do next week. The class is officially ended. This t-shirt looks really bad. So I think I can just open chat and we can answer questions there. Preferably questions related to the class first, and then we can do other types of questions as well. All right. So where did it start? So it's a Notion doc and a Notion doc and a Notion doc and a Notion doc and a Google doc. And Bhaiya, we have created services and do many things, but can't we just use kube proxy for communication with pods? You can, but then you're just proxying requests. You're starting kube proxy. It's for testing purposes. You can use kube proxy. But it's for testing, right? You port forward for testing things. Actually, I know what I meant. What I thought you meant was port forwarding. Maybe kube proxy is something else. But no, you use services for production. What else? But yeah, we have created service. Same question. Right, a lot of talks, no real questions. Could you say some project will confirm my selection next Super 30? Just, I mean, it shouldn't come from the source, right? Think of something, whatever. Um, yeah, I mean, just think of something, a problem that you want to solve and make sure it's production ready. All right, yeah, I'm going to start. Uh, Please, can you consider me for Super 30 of the projects are over? So just fill the form. I don't think I can individually review. We have people who are reviewing the list, and the last 50 I will review myself. The last 60 or something like that. So just fill the form, and there is someone reviewing your code over there. Um, just fill for the interview, and then I'll just let you know in the interview. It's very honest, easy to tell in an interview if you're ideal for not. So yeah, who to approach? Yash, Ankur, and Aryan are handling this in Discord. Central India. No real plans of more meetups at the moment, but you guys should come to Noida. Like I'll be on campus almost every other day now, so it's a very big campus. You should come there. That's a great question. If you don't want to use Clerk, you can do it just with JWT. That's the most simplest first principles approach that I would use. So have 5 different JWT secrets, have 5 different sign-in endpoints, sign the JWTs independently, decode them in middlewares, and just have a role, just like you do rec.user ID equal to something, just have a rec.role equal to something, and do role-based access after that. That's the simplest approach. Clerk provides something for this, like out of the box. But if you don't want to use Clerk, that's easy. Righty. End-to-end encrypted rooms. What does end-to-end encryption over here even mean? Oh wow! But like, if you're using HTTPS, do you even? God damn it! Do you have, or you do have credentials? Oh no, different guy. That's like एकदम end-to-end copy, bhai. Amazing. It's really good. Yup. Now I want to see this code. This is really good. But what does end-to-end encryption mean? No. Key never touches the server. All drawing data is encrypted and decoded on the client. Server sees nothing. Where is the code for this? Collabit draw. Oh, there you go. This is pretty clean. Like this is almost a confirmed selection in Super 30 free wala matlab. This was pretty good. What is that? Oh, it's like a dumb. Sorry, not dumb, but yeah, get it. Yeah, I think I see a few things that are really good here. I mean, yeah, you almost assume you are in Super 30. I still do an interview, but it's pretty good. Like this is also very hard to find what you've done. So, anyways, what I was doing was I was trying to look at your code really quickly. You said end-to-end encryption or something. You have live collaboration as well. भाई तो बहुत ही crazy होगा ये if this is true, that you have live collaboration. Have you used their code base or something? This looks very similar to their UI. All right, let's sign up. Alrighty, how do I sign in? Right. How do I do a? Wait, what is this? There we go. Doki. So if I open this in a new tab, I see this. So I'm never mind. It's still pretty good. I hope the code is clean, and if it is, this is a really good project. Really long story. Yeah, basically. What is your salary expectation? Actually, great. I can just refer you right now. Where was this? Kulabi draw guy. Follow. Yeah, you'll probably be ideal for a role. Oh, you said you're 5 LPA. So what's your salary expectation? Are you okay with on-site or you only want go? Can you put it here at the end? I have this open. At the end, just put salary expectations. Are you okay with Delhi on-site or not? Noida on-site or not? There is a remote company also, but they're just purely front-end. There's another, I don't know if you're into front-end too much, but there are two front-end opportunities basically, both on-site. Sorry, one on-site, one remote, and one back-end opportunity. Back-end, likely you look pretty ideal, which is why I'm asking if, you can put your, seems like the page is down or some reason. But yeah, just put it here. Or I don't know, if you're on Twitter, I'll just follow you. We can talk there. Where are you on Twitter? Kudrom. Cool. Close it. Done. Dynamic base image selection. If the code is on S3, using a base image with only the runtime instead of preloaded base images, if the code is not on S3, use the existing. Sorry, this is like no context. I don't know what this means. When is on S3 is true, polls S3 to slash app in the pod. Oh, okay. I get what you're saying. If you're going S3, use a minimal base image. I don't understand these two statements. This one makes sense. Runtime based image mapping. Define a mapping for runtime based images. Node.js only, Rust only. Yeah, this also I don't understand. Just write the code and show it to me. I've seen your PR. Just write the code and show it to me. How to import enum from in monorepo as you export Prisma client from DB. You can export types from the same DB package. So just export whatever types you want, which will include the enum as well. So the client automatically creates all the types including the enums, or create another manual enum for now and just proceed. If you can't find the auto-generated one in the client, just create your own enum, export it from DB and proceed. Have this open. Oh, things I'm doing, creating a pod. That's good. But the project is already in S3. Pull it accordingly to the type of the project, assign it a base image. So I'm a little confused over here. There still is a base image, right, which has Node.js or something. Or when you say base image, do you mean starter React code? Or do you mean just an empty image that has Node.js installed or Rust installed? Yeah, there are a few terms that are a little hard for me to read, by which I mean I don't understand what you mean. Project with code. Your project is already on S3, then pull it according to the project type. And according to the type of project, assign a base image with only runtime without basic code. Yes. And then pull the code. That is perfect. Or have the basic code in there, right? Delete the folder and recopy it from S3. Doesn't matter. No point creating two different images. One with code, one without boilerplate code. Have the boilerplate code. Before you're pulling from S3, delete everything from the image or the Docker container. Creating, I don't know what this line means. Creating base image with VS Code runtime, perfect. If you need this using your approach, then you need this. If you choose my approach, you don't need this step. Mainly every changes on Kubernetes. Yeah, I would agree. This is where most of the changes would be. But S3 backups is also not deployed yet. The thing that deploys to S3. So yeah, you will have to do that as well. Improving Docker image creation events. That is good. Project with code working like you continue. Yeah, that sounds good. I'm coming back to this. I have it open. Let me close this. I can't really share that, but you don't have to prepare. Whatever you've been doing in cohort 3 until now is enough. If you've done cohort 3 until if this guy, you saw the project, right? If you've done utna, even less than that, you should be fine. If I can get 10 people like this, that would be great, like this guy. But it feels like the page was revoked or something. I'm ready for anything 10 LPA. Cool. Yeah, you should come to Super 30 for sure. I can already get you in. It might not be greater than 10 LPA. It might be equal to 10 LPA or slightly lesser. No downside. So if you are up, I have followed you on Twitter. Message me. I can push for greater than 10. 10 might happen. 9.5 will happen for sure. 10 might happen. Uske upar something might be difficult. No downside. Let me know if that sounds interesting. I'll refer you. uh, a repo with a lot of learnings. Ooh, see. Oh, it's like a bunch of commands for doing a bunch of things. I saw HT somewhere. Uh, renew certificates, network policies. It's like a little header from where we are at, but external access, ingress load balancer. It's very cool having all of these handy. Let me start this. And by the time we can complete Kubernetes, like we're on Kubernetes 1 right now. If there's Kubernetes 2, then there's Kubernetes 3. This should be a very handy repo to look at. Done. So well probably you do get responses, but this is very interesting problem statement. I'll probably add this as a project to Super 30. It's like a pretty decent Super 30 project. In the last one, someone created just Typeform. This is Typeform plus AI. And this shouldn't be too hard to do that as well. So what is this? Websites.co.in? What is websites.co.in? Websites.co.in. It seems like it's an Indian company. I would just check a few things, including their. Oh, it's not an Indian company, is it? Oh, it is. It's a Mumbai-based company. So, if they're not asking for the code, then that's fine. If that's not the code, they might be making you do free work. I don't know. So pick and choose based on that. Don't share the code maybe. But other than that, it's generally a great problem statement to work on. Like eventually open source it, but don't share it with them. Um, uh, Content doesn't exist. Hope you'll find this proof of work. Not able to type in here. UI is a little messed up. There's this paywall or whatever. Sign up. Well, but it's pretty basic, like decent projects. Not not bad for sure. This one okay, I'll log in really quickly. I just want to see what you've built. But if it's just a clone of what's on YouTube, then and if it's user time container, it probably is. I mean, decent. Oh no, it does have VS Code here. Oh no, it doesn't. Uh, I don't know what is happening. Oh, okay, that's not bad. Okay, web container, so never mind. Uh, yeah, I don't know what this is. It's a little confusing. Everything is disabled. Uh, oh, there we go. you should show steps somewhere here, but that is pretty close to what is needed. It's a little confusing for me. There we go. Okay, much better. Ah, that's good. Uh, now I would say this is pretty good. Preview. What did I ask to make? I forgot. Maybe nothing. Maybe this is just the default one. This is not bad. What are you using for the editor? Have a few things here. Has the file system on the left. You said web containers, right? So you're probably just using web container. We can confirm that, right? Yeah, you're just using web container, so that's fine. Yeah, that's pretty good. But how is it any different from what I made on YouTube then? Other than the UI being a little different, I saw you could see the tab layout, mobile layout. Other than that, is it any different? Cool. Done. Did I have no questions here? This guy closed it. But yeah, just message me on if 10 LPA works or might work somewhere close to that number. Cool. Anything else? Any other question? Let me look at chat again. Open it one more time. Alrighty. Someone has a faulty Google Doc link. Know what that is. But yeah, how much of Slant development skill is sufficient into Super 30? Free. I can write programs, so that's good. One thing you can do is, can you do some validator stuff, please? That would confirm your seat for sure. But would it be nice if someone who has validator experience comes on the campus? Because I have companies where I can refer you, and generally good thing to have. So the times have gone where a chat application was impressive, my friend. So very good, but again, not super impressive anymore. What is this? AI powered collaborative code editor. That one's fine. Okay. Oh, it's a lead code with an AI bot, right? Not bad. Sorry, I have 1 minute only left, so let me. Good project. You should just ask him what are they hiring for, and okay, in a science-based. Let's see. Feel like I've. Yeah, you should apply. Well, long story short, just apply, and we'll see how it goes. Interviews. Monday. I'm starting interviews. So we'll see how it goes from there. You should talk to the Pumpfun guy and tell me also what are they looking for. I contributed to Deepin and made 2 PRs and did whatever you asked, and you just glanced it. Assign क्या कुछ नहीं है. You mean Deepin वाला जो project that I made isn't super productionized or anything. I have no goal of productionizing it, but I'll still look at it. USD and then returning INR token. Won't there be a Solana contract? Yeah, there will be a Solana contract, right? That's locking all the tokens on one side and creating new INR tokens on the other side. Can you say how can we implement distributed systems in Ethereum? Would the implementation be along the same lines? What do you mean when you say distributed systems in Ethereum? Ethereum itself is a distributed system, but you can't create distributed applications on top of it. Are you saying distributed systems like Ethereum? When you say in Ethereum, Ethereum is a single-threaded processor, right, or a single-threaded sequencer. So I don't understand this statement, or what you mean over here. Maybe elaborate a little bit more. How possible? Can you please? How is this possible? Can you please say? I have no idea. I don't know. There are some scripts people run, but I have no idea how that happens. I mean, it's not too difficult, right? You can predate commits. That's how you do it. I made this WebSocket Python backend API. That's very cool. Cool. I will have to call it now. I'll keep this one bookmarked because the first one was an interesting project. Um, yeah, we're doing it in North right now. We'll see. What happens when it starts. Will be probably mid-July is when on-site starts. Online will start pretty soon. Sorry, I closed this without reading it. Done. Which one? Just Manish. Sorry, I'm still confused. No, different guy. Just DM me on Twitter again right now. I'll look at it. Which profile was this for? Just DM me on Twitter. I'll take a look. Okay, 3 more minutes. Last question I'm taking. I'm interested in pursuing software development, but I'm getting an offer for cloud engineering in touch. So that's not the worst thing in the world. You should accept it. Not really. It's easy to go from cloud to SD, hard to go from SD to cloud. Would cloud? I mean, I don't know. That statement probably isn't true. Probably just depends on the company. It's harder to do cloud or DevOps, which is why I'm saying if you know that, you'll probably be able to do full stack. Oh, I don't know that. If it's client support, then I have no idea. Probably not the best role then. I would never suggest anyone to stay unemployed. If you're getting a job, just take it. And then, आगे जाके देखेंगे क्या करना है और you can still get a better job, but do not recommend anyone leave their job for super 30 or otherwise. Very anxiety inducing moment for everyone. All right, chalo, we'll call it here, guys. Have a good night. I will see you guys next week. Bye bye.